Welcome, and thank you for joining us this afternoon's live panel discussion, which forms part of the Data Centres Ireland Virtual Festival. My name is Hugh Robinson, and I'm the Exhibition Director for Data Centres Ireland, which, due to the pandemic, cannot be held this year. However, will be held again next year on the 16th and 17th of November at the RDS in Dublin. Data Centres Ireland Virtual Festival consists of 2 live panel discussions held daily over the course of the week. They have featured industry leaders and experts discussing key areas affecting data centres both in Ireland and internationally, and today is no different. As well as the live panel discussion, the festival also has a range of on-demand content which can be accessed through the Data Centres Ireland website. This webinar discusses the issues related to standby generation and couldn't be more timely given circumstances both in Ireland and across the world. If you would like to ask any questions, please put those in the chat box and they shall be addressed at the end of the discussion. This webinar will be recorded and uploaded to the Data Centres Ireland website as additional on-demand content. The moderator for this afternoon's panel discussion is Ed Ansett, CEO and founder of i3 Solutions. So without further ado from me, over to you, Ed.
Thanks very much, Hugh. Welcome, panelists. If I could ask, if you would, please, to just introduce yourselves. I'm sure most people know who you are anyway. So John, Antonio, Simon, Rory. So maybe we start with John and go in that order. John, over to you.
Thank you, Ed. My name is John Curley. I'm the General Manager of Clark Energy in Ireland. Clark Energy is a specialist provider of on-site gas engine energy solutions based on Yambacher gas engines. We operate in 25 territories around the world. Clark Energy is a Kohler company, part of the Kohler Power division, that provide on-site power solutions for 120 years. Kohler Power provide diesel engines for standby power applications in data centers worldwide.
Thanks, John.
Thank you.
Antonio, please.
Absolutely. Thank you very much, Ed. Thank you very much, everyone. My name is Antonio Cocha. I'm the Global Head for Business Development and Customer Projects at ABB Power Protection. ABB Power Protection is a business line of the Smart Power division within the ABB family. And we are basically data center or a critical power industry OEM, meaning that we basically provide all products which are required for the critical power infrastructure, from UPSs, static transfer switches, power distribution units, power quality equipment, different typology of UPSs going from double conversion UPSs to line interactive UPSs, any type of, let's say, voltage constellation from low voltage to medium voltage.
Okay, thanks, Antonio. Simon, please.
Afternoon, everyone. My name is Simon McCormick. I'm the Chief Technical Officer at Echelon Data Centres. Echelon is a developer and operator of real estate and infrastructure assets for the data center industry. We're headquartered here in Dublin, but we've also got facilities in London in the UK as well, with a few upcoming acquisitions in continental Europe.
Thanks very much, Simon. And finally, but not least, Rory, please.
Hi, everyone. I'm Rory Monaghan. I'm a lecturer in Energy Systems Engineering and Mechanical Engineering at the National University of Ireland in Galway. And I'm involved in quite a number of research projects around renewable hydrogen. And I guess one of the big issues around hydrogen is getting demand for hydrogen. And so my team here have been doing some exploratory work over the last months and years to examine how hydrogen and how fuel cell technologies, related technologies, can fit in with the data center industry. So I'm really looking forward to learning from my colleagues here about the data center industry.
Thanks, Rory. Maybe I could start with you, because I don't think many people have got much experience of working with hydrogen in a data center context. I certainly haven't. I'm, like anyone else, have been interested in the development of fuel cells on the periphery. It's not my core expertise for some time. What do you see as the future for hydrogen fuel cells in a large-scale data center context?
Yeah, well, look, thanks for. I was kind of hoping I could talk last after everyone else goes.
That's what I thought.
I'm very happy to go now. I can maybe stake my claim to territory here.
I figured I'd get you with that. I figured you'd probably.
Thanks. So, look, I guess the first thing is that what I might try and do is maybe just separate for a second hydrogen and fuel cells, because the two of them don't need to necessarily go together. So I'll talk about hydrogen and specifically what we call green hydrogen first. So this is the idea of using renewable electricity to perform what's called electrolysis, to split water into oxygen and hydrogen. That hydrogen can be then used as an energy, what we call an energy carrier, which means it's kind of analogous to electricity. It's got very different properties to electricity, but it can meet different types of demands. So once you have hydrogen, you can do a range of things with it. Most of these things are not currently done on a wide scale now. Like you can burn it in engines, you can burn it in automotive engines, you can burn it in the gas engines that are used in data centers and in gas turbines, and I'll maybe get to those in a moment. So on the hydrogen side, hydrogen is a fuel is an energy carrier that we can produce some type of useful end product from that. One of the things we can do with hydrogen is do the reverse of electrolysis and put it back in a fuel cell and make electricity directly from the chemical energy inside hydrogen. So that's where we bring in fuel cells. They're what I would call an electrochemical engine, where we don't burn anything, but we just have this direct conversion from chemical energy to electricity, and it can be very highly efficient. It is silent. It's got very few moving parts. It's got very low emissions. So we've got the hydrogen as the energy carrier. We've got the fuel cells as the kind of the power unit. Where do these fit in to the gas into the data center industry? Well, I guess my thinking on this has been motivated quite a bit by the recent news in Ireland about if we do continue to, and I'm not saying that these stories are necessarily completely true, but there's a perception out there that the data center industry is causing a massive increase in demand in power in Ireland, and we're starting to run up against supply demand issues. And there's a story this weekend in the Business Post about EirGrid are now talking to data centers and saying that you need to have 100% backup power. So if we think about 100% backup power, does that mean that we're only going to be running backup power in periods where there's not enough electricity to meet the demand? Or could we start looking at data centers providing demand side management services, grid services, coming on, not necessarily when there's supply demand issues, but when the grid just needs additional support, or coming on when electricity is expensive? Generating power in this distributed way is not as efficient as doing it centrally. So there are emissions issues around that, around gas engines and small scale gas turbines. So where I see hydrogen coming in the medium term is potentially as a blend fuel for these technologies. And this is the work that's underway right now. And I think John mentioned there that they work with Jenbacher engines. I'm aware that Jenbacher are moving towards a 100% hydrogen fueled gas engine. I know Wärtsilä are doing the same. So there is a recognition among the distributed generation community that hydrogen is a potential fuel where you could use periods of high renewable energy availability, produce hydrogen and generate on site. And that isn't just for, providing power to the data center. We could also look at providing services to the grid. So that's where I see it going. That's where I see, maybe not where I see it going, and that's an opportunity in the short term. In the longer term, then, people like Microsoft are looking at 100% hydrogen fuel cell backup. Now, this is moving away from gas engines. This is looking at the fuel cell technologies. They're not particularly well developed right now from a commercial point of view. This is very much a kind of a maybe TRL 5 or 5, 6, 7 kind of technology, but that is being examined as a sort of a longer term deployment of hydrogen and fuel cells.
Very interesting. I think we will, if it's okay, I'd very much like to return to this question of grid support and embedded energy, centralized systems, distributed systems as a major theme during this discussion. But if I could just have get Simon's input and his take on the future. I mean, Simon, it doesn't have to be specific to Ireland, but I'd like to understand your perspective from a local point of view, but also a global perspective if you have one.
Yeah, I suppose I start with what Rory ended with there, which is the commerciality of hydrogen fuel cells. It probably isn't there at the moment. We saw Microsoft make a bit of a splash a few months ago about this. This is the route they were pursuing. But I think if you speak to anyone in Microsoft, they'll recognize that it's a longer term play. I suppose for taking it back to a more general view of the market, Echelon's view since inception is that we need to deliver real estate and infrastructure assets sustainably. Sustainably doesn't necessarily mean environmentally friendly. We mean sustainably in the broader sense of the word, in that it's got to have economic credentials, it's got to have social credentials, as well as those in addressing those environmental considerations. That's true wherever you go in the world for data centers. So it's not an issue that's unique to Ireland. I would say though that it is exacerbated here, as you said, by the issues of demand far outstripping supply at the moment. So if I was to give you the one liner, I'd say it's about the data center industry taking part responsibly in grid operations going forward, whether that's centralized generation, distributed generation, whether it's bringing more renewables online to the system. We need to be an intrinsic part of that conversation, and not the what we've seen previously, which is put in your application for grid power, cross your fingers, hope for the best, and then get on with it once you've got it. There needs to be a bit more of a broader think around this as we go forward.
We'll come back to your pretty extraordinary wind farm project a little bit later, because it sounds pretty fascinating. There's lots to understand from my perspective, and hopefully the audience's perspective on that. So hopefully we can cover that in a bit of detail later on. Let's if we could just go to Antonio. And then Antonio, what are the thoughts that you would like to share that are particularly important to you in the context of one, Ireland, and two, the way you see the large-scale data center energy deployment going? I mean, I know nobody knows the future for sure, but just to get your take on what you think is going to be happening.
Thank you very much. Maybe Ed and colleagues, I would like to start with a couple of numbers, obviously, which will be helping framing a little bit of discussion. And with these numbers, I also would like to get connected to some of the comments that Rory and Simon have brought to the picture. Now, obviously, I mean, we have a fact. We have a Paris Agreement. Obviously, we have to reduce our CO2 emissions, and we have to try to lower the temperature of this globe by 1.5 or 2 degrees in the next years. On the other side, I mean, there is basically the fact that the data center industry is growing like crazy. It's just growing like never before. And there is more and more demand for let me call it hyperscale environments, but in fact, more in general for data centers that can go from small to medium to large scale. And obviously, data centers today are an important, I would say, critical load to be supplied by the electrical infrastructure. And now we have obviously a certain situation where specifically and particularly for Ireland, we have the data center industry. Obviously, it's one of the most important ones to be, in fact, supplied by the public grid. And also we have that we know it, EirGrid is actually trying to pursue a 70% renewable energy electricity production policy by the 2030. And now there is a little bit this kind of situation. There is a huge demand. Nevertheless, I mean, this is obviously on the planning phase. And on the other side, I mean, this demand has to somehow match the production capacity, as Rory was actually saying. And we know it. I mean, renewable energies, specifically the wind energy, because I guess that Ireland is actually looking more towards renewable in terms of wind energy. This is very highly unpredictable energy. And I'm not at all surprised that at some point, since with this energy, which is highly unpredictable during the day, and you may even have some kind of swings over the day, which can last 6 to 8 hours. At some point, I mean, the public operator is actually saying to the data center operators, you have to make sure that you have got as well 100% power backup available onto your sites. Because, I mean, obviously, when you have a renewable energy to be integrated into the grid, you have to consider that in some cases you may have overproduction of energy. And overproduction may be dangerous because obviously if the voltage goes very high, I mean, you can have issues on all the components of your electrical infrastructure. And the second thing is that once you have, down production and so underproduction of energy, you may even have the power outage, which are so scary to us. So I would say that data centers today are definitely a massive infrastructure to be fed. Nevertheless, they are becoming so big, and in fact, I mean, the power ranges that today we are actually considering for the data centers bills, they can easily vary from 20 to 30 to 40 and 50 megawatts per installation. So the data centers are becoming so big that they naturally have to consider themselves as a part of the grid. I mean, we cannot consider anymore the data center as a cost of doing business just to keep alive the servers or the network rooms and to make sure that we have all data safely and stored and reliably stored into our data banks. But we need to consider that the data center itself or themselves, they can play a very important role, not only towards the stabilization of the grid, and so allowing as well a better integration of the renewable energy source. You want to have wind, you want to have tidal, you want to have solar, but it can also play a very important role because maybe in the future, the business model of the data center operator will change as well a little bit, moving from just, securing the loads, securing the critical loads, also towards an energy trading organization by eventually selling the extra energy which is produced locally into the grid.
All right, so that's fascinating. That's something I want to come back to Simon on as well, in particular. So, but John, before I do, last but not least, of course, John, embedded generation. I think everybody realizes that in the context of, I should have said at the beginning, John, forgive me, guys, we are talking about large-scale data centers in the context of this conversation. Okay, I mean, you mentioned 30, 40, 50 megawatts. So currently, for what it's worth, the largest one our company's working on at the moment in terms of overall consumption is about 150 megawatts, 150. So it's pretty huge. It's overseas, but we're not. For me, the way I look at data centers is in three broad categories: hyperscale, which is predominantly the big three, by which I mean Microsoft, AWS, and Google. And then we've got co-location, which includes wholesale, which are speculative plays for whom, for the most part, hyperscale are significant customers, but also there are many other customers that fit into the wholesale colo space. Simon, I'm sure you're aware of that, of course, because those are your customers. And then there's finally enterprise. And we still have, albeit a diminishing number of enterprise. So I think we need to focus this conversation today around the large scale stuff, by which I mean, let's say, for the sake of example, 20 megawatts upwards, because, or maybe let's say 10 megawatts upwards. Let's say 10 megawatts upwards. So with that, John, please, sorry, I jumped in.
Yeah, No, I think it's always very good to contextualize these conversations in that way, and the scale is enormous. You know, like I've been in the energy business all my working life. I graduated in Cork in 1982 and spent my life in the energy business. And I think, you know, everybody would say that, you know, we're very lucky in Ireland to have the challenge of a growing electricity demand. You know, we're also benefiting greatly from decisions that have been made previously in Ireland. You know, 20 years ago, our commitment to doing onshore renewable at the scale we did it has meant that now people consuming electricity in Ireland, 33% of that electricity is coming from renewable energy, renewable sources, and predominantly wind at the moment. But there's almost 800 megawatts of solar to be connected through the first tranche of the RESS or RESS1 in that sense. So there's a tremendous success story here, and you know there's a range of things I think that attract data centers to Ireland, and particularly the large scale data centers to Ireland. You know, some of those are rehearsed time and time again in the press and that, but it's English speaking. There's a lot of these companies are based in America. That makes sense to come here. You know, we have a good story to tell about electricity in Ireland from the point of view of the quantum of electricity that comes from renewable sources. You know, on-site generation is very interesting because I think, you know, people tend to think of it as something new for data centers. But in fact, I can't think of a data center that has been built that doesn't have some form of backup or standby power in it. You know, the data center companies that you've mentioned, Ed, and others of those have purchased and procured large amounts of generators, predominantly diesel engine generators, that provide that data center with that two-end functionality. One end being the grid and the other end being the standby generation. You know, in Ireland, we typically measure our grid outage in terms of minutes, and the data centers provide for hours of diesel engines running to provide that backup. So it's a very successful story in that sense. I think the challenge that comes now is that as data centers are evolving from, you know, the first data center that I did probably 25 years ago in London, you know, we put in for every 1 megawatt of engine we put in 1 megawatt of cooling. You know, the cooling in data centers has evolved now, and the density of power on the racks has increased, and you know they've become more efficient. And I think now there's very realistically there's very realistically new developers of data centers are looking at the return for the assets that they're investing in. You know, typically standby engines that are, you know, operating for just that purpose become stranded assets, and the level of employment that you can get for the capital that you're investing in that standby asset is changing. And again, coming back to that sustainability model, you know, is there something we could do with that on-site generation, that standby asset, that will improve the return on capital, but also can contribute to the sustainability of the electricity in the particular host nation or the host country that you're operating in. Now, you realize that I can talk for Ireland at this stage, so it's kind of I'm happy to.
No, you're fine. You're fine, John. I mean, not at all. I mean, you know, I think there's enough time in this session for everybody to speak freely. But okay, since that is perhaps a point to.
Well, if I could pick up one point, if you wouldn't mind, Ed, one point that's very interesting, and Rory used a phrase earlier on that I think was a really excellent phrase, because I hadn't heard it used in the context before, and that's the concept of hydrogen as an energy carrier. Now, that's a very interesting point. You know, for those people that understand about the electricity grid in Ireland, one of our challenges is that we are, you know, in reality, we produce more, and this is a statistic that Dr. David Connolly from IWEA will roll out, and it's a very, very important statistic, is we produce more on-site wind energy than any other country in Europe. And I'm making the point there of onshore wind, not on-site, onshore wind than any other country in Europe. And we're about to embark on a very what's the right word? A great amount of offshore wind, some of which Simon has mentioned already in the Garden of Ireland, County Wicklow. there is a real opportunity there with that. We will have an abundance of electrical energy coming from these renewable sources, and 33% of what we have installed at the moment is produced from renewable sources. The challenge is that when the wind is blowing and we have no demand for that, and one of the grid measurements is something called the system non-synchronous penetration, or SNSP, which limits or curtails the amount of wind that we can have on the system at any one time. And in Ireland, we're bumping up against 60% SNSP, sort of unheard of.
SNSP, sorry, what was that?
SNSP is system non-synchronous penetration. So it's a measure used by people like Antonio and I who talk about electricity every day of the week, and we think about that in terms of the amount of renewable electricity, i.e. non-synchronous electricity, and that's a technical phrase, but you can read in that solar and wind, that can be connected to the grid at any one time. So if your demand is X, you can have, at the moment in Ireland, we target about 60% SNSP. So 40% will come from traditional large-scale power plants, and 60% is coming from renewable. And today, when I looked at it this morning, about 58% of our electricity production was coming from wind sources because of the weather system that's passing through Ireland at the moment. Now, as you transition from one to the other, that creates great challenges for the grid system, because you're moving from centrally located power production, or to centrally located from distributed power, and that presents challenges. And the need is to have flexibility in the system to be able to deal with those things happening. And there's an opportunity there for intelligent ways of dealing with on-site generation to marry that together and to produce a result that's beneficial to everybody.
I think that's probably an interesting, a good time to go back to Simon, talk about County Wicklow and what you're doing there. I've read a bit about that, Simon. I must say I'm not informed on it, but it looks fascinating. Can you tell us what's going on? And I imagine that dovetails into what John is talking about in terms of grid and embedded energy integration.
Yeah, absolutely. So there's a couple of pieces of the puzzle, which in and of themselves would be pretty chunky projects, pretty sizable delivery challenges, and we decided to couple them together to try and get the best of both worlds. So it started with the Echelon data centers facility. Okay, so that's what we term Dub 20, and the plan is to consume around 100 megawatts of grid power on that site. The reason that we selected that site was look, it's in a good location. It's beside a major part of the motorway network. It has access to fiber. It has access to, even before we talk about the offshore wind, it has a lot of renewable energy projects around it. I think at last count there were half a dozen projects that are either up and running or in the delivery pipeline somewhere, and that's a mix of wind and solar. So we always had our eye on it as a longer term play. Importantly, it sits outside of the Dublin constrained area. I see one of the comments in the chat box was that we don't have an issue in Ireland with the lack of power. What we've got essentially is a transmission problem, in that where you've got a high demand for data centers, there's a problem with actually getting the supply to those locations. So being based down in Wicklow, we don't have those same challenges. We then were contacted by SSE, it must be close to a year or 18 months ago. We entered into a dialogue with them, and the output of that then has been the joint venture. So we're going to collaboratively develop the onshore grid infrastructure as they go ahead and develop the second phase of their Arklow wind bank project. So I think we've got an initial load there, 520 megawatts coming onto the grid, with the potential for that to grow to 800 megawatts over time. I think from our perspective, it brings together a number of high priority issues for Ireland. One is the continuing support for the data center industry, and the government's desire to see increased foreign direct investment, the ongoing participation of those multinationals, particularly from the US and from Asia, to participate in the Irish economy. And coupled with that, the climate action goals, and a big part of the climate action goals revolves around increase in wind energy, and specifically offshore wind energy. So we really see ourselves as being at the intersection of those two policies. I mean, fundamentally, though, at the end of the day, we're a data center developer, and I mean, what we've actually got to provide to our customers. It's great talking about government policies and the macro level. At the micro level, we still got to achieve the same aim, don't we? I mean, we still got to provide the requisite uptime according to the customer's SLA, and that's where this is where I think we feed really into the heart of this discussion today, is how do we achieve that with renewable energy, with the grid, with an increase in battery energy and storage, with the incorporation of different types of UPS systems. I'd love to be turning up with all the answers today, but it's something that we're working on at the moment.
No, I think that's very prudent, because I don't think anyone really knows for sure. But I mean, I think that one of the purposes of this discussion is to try to to gain as much expertise and input in terms of what we think the likely future direction will be.
Ed, if I could just add a point there, I think it is important to understand that I don't think there is a magic bullet for this. This will be an integration or a convergence of a number of technologies coming together that will resolve this issue. And Mark Foley, who's the chief executive of EirGrid, mentioned that recently in an article in the Eolus magazine that it is going to be that I believe EirGrid have done a fantastic job. In fact, I think it's probably world leading in what they've done in Ireland with the level of SNSP that they've brought the country to, the amount of renewables they have facilitated, and so on like that. And it will be that combination of technologies that bring us to the next phase in that way.
What's fascinating for me is the commitment to the climate change accord, because we all know data centers are traditionally very heavy from a carbon footprint, NOx footprint, carbon footprint. And in Ireland, as I understand it, we have got a very high ratio of data center power requirement compared to the overall amount of electricity available. I think that the stat I saw, I think it was an authoritative stat, was around about 27% overall in the next few years, which is, just to give you a bit of background, I'm not trying to be big-headed, but some years ago I was involved in writing the government data center technology roadmap for Singapore government, and that was a 20-year roadmap. And as part of that calculation, we had no idea what percentage of the overall electricity consumption or energy consumption was attributable to data centers. And although it's not been published, at least our data wasn't published, the figure, give or take, is around about 5%. Now you go back to Kumi's work that he did some years ago. Jonathan Kumi, I'm sure you guys will know him. You certainly would, Rory, because you went to the same university. But that was an authoritative piece of work, and he came up with a number at that time, 1 or 2% of global energy. And then we've got this figure that we came up with in Singapore, which was, let's say 5 or 6%, whatever it was. To quickly realised that that was the most, that was the per unit area, the most data center concentrated location in the world, except for Luxembourg, which is tiny. So you could perhaps put that aside. But now look at Ireland. Ireland has just come blasting out of nowhere, and 27% is phenomenal. So how does this mesh with the government's commitment to the Paris? It's got to be completely offset by renewables, hasn't it? It's the only way you can do it. In fact, it's probably got to go even further than net zero, hasn't it, Rory?
Yeah. I guess about that 27%, the figures that I've seen are depending on the scenario that EirGrid have run. It could be anywhere between 27 and 40%.
Okay, but you know what I mean. It's a big number.
It's an enormous proportion now. But I think thinking of EirGrid, and I think John mentioned it earlier that EirGrid are world leading. I absolutely completely agree. I think what EirGrid have done in getting us to be almost 40% on average powered by wind for the year is absolutely superb. And our grid is an almost isolated grid. We have one strong and one weak connection to the UK, whereas I think we're technically number 2 in wind. I think Denmark beats us, but Denmark is essentially a spur on the German grid. And I apologize to anyone from Denmark.
I think
that's quite controversial.
All the Danish people have just left.
I am truly sorry to any Danish people here, but electrically speaking, they are deeply integrated with both the German grid and the Scandinavian grid to the north. So it is, I think, what EirGrid and the wind developers have managed to achieve in Ireland is truly remarkable. Now, to get to the government target, before this government came in, the government target was for 70% renewable electricity averaged over the year by 2030. And that's going to mostly be met by wind. Okay, so that SNSP limit that John mentioned, this is the instantaneous limit of renewable percentage on the grid. It's currently 65%. That's going to have to go to 90 or 95%. So any one time in 2030, we could be 90% wind powered, and no country has come remotely close to that. So how do we enable that? Well, we're going to need further interconnection with the UK. And I know I'm getting a little bit off the topic of data centers for now, but I will come to it.
Fine.
But we're going to need more interconnection. So there's a further 2 interconnections, I believe, planned with the UK. And we've just heard an announcement earlier this year of an interconnector with France. So that's all great, but these take a long time to build. And so that's one side. We're going to need storage. We're going to need, there's battery storage sites being built around the country. There's a 100 megawatt site under construction in County Offaly right now. So these are all needed. What we're also going to need is demand side management. And we have that in Ireland in a small, in a limited extent. We're going to need to see much, much more of that. And I do think that with, when you look at these projections of 28 to 40% data centers power consumption, data centers will need to do their share of the lifting on that. Now, I think it's an opportunity because people who do demand side management, they get paid for it, and they get paid quite handsomely to be on if you like, kept on retainer. So it's definitely an opportunity that data centers could take. I'll just say one more thing. This maybe isn't going to come in the 2030 timeframe, but between 2035 and 20, I do see a big role for hydrogen in enabling large-scale renewables. So if we have batteries around the country, batteries are absolutely fantastic for storing energy over short periods of time, from minutes to hours up to a day or two. Batteries are fantastic. But if you're looking at if we've got potentially more than 100% of our electricity coming from wind in 2030 in the winter time, and if we're going to have a big lull in the summer, what technology can store that energy over that period of time? interconnection will get us some of the way, but generally, if it's not windy here, it's not windy over Great Britain either. So what can we use to store that? Hydrogen is one of the potential things we can use. We can put hydrogen in the gas grid. We can move it around. We can get it out of the pure electricity sector, and it will hopefully help us decarbonize those bits of the energy system that are difficult for direct electrification to reach.
Got you. Antonio, I'm dying to jump into you, but I just want to ask you guys, if you've got any views on the solid oxide fuel cell. I know there's only one company that manufactures that, but they're doing pretty well in the United States. My sense is they're going to, their market share is going to increase. Any views on the solid oxide fuel cells, guys?
So, in fact, maybe I also would like to connect very, very briefly before to what John and Rory and Simon have brought already to the picture. I also have to say that, Ireland is definitely, a kind of pillar and a reference point worldwide. There is no discussion about that. The probably is not anymore just the largest hub into Europe, but it's probably one of the biggest hubs for data center applications worldwide. Today, there is Singapore, there is definitely Dublin, and there is basically also some additional sites on the east coast of the US. But these are the three main center of gravities for the data center industry. Now, I also would like to say that I also agree with basically what the gentlemen have already said. I believe that at the end of the day, the formula for a successful and for a sustainable business stays in the integration of different energy sources and different energy technologies to be harmonized and to be harmonically connected and integrated with each other within the grid environment. And specifically if the vision is actually having 100% of energy coming from renewables, again, going back to what we basically said, renewables is highly unpredictable, then you need to have a way to store this energy. You need to have it because otherwise, there is no way that you can guarantee the continuity, the power continuity, and the uptime, which is the most important requirement for Simon and all the other data center operators. Now, obviously, one dimension, this is another thing that I would like also to highlight. Here, today, I feel like that we are already facing a problem that requires immediate tackling, in the sense that it's not that... for example, going back to hydrogen, yes, I also believe that hydrogen and fuel cell, can be, an answer to the sustainable energy usage for the future, but not today, because today we still have not a commercially viable business model that enables the fuel cells to be, competitive from a cost standpoint. Okay.
I understand that from, sorry to cut you off. I understand that from the hydrogen point of view, but the solid oxide fuel cell, that is commercially viable.
This is a good point. Now, if you look at, for example, the fuel cell based on ammonia, obviously, here the energy carrier is represented by the NH3, which can be easily liquefied, can be easily stored into environment. Obviously, that's got certain drawbacks. Because obviously it can be an hazardous acid, and that's why it requires a certain level of safety and personal protections for the operators dealing with that type of energy source. And apparently, and this is basically what I have seen in the public benchmarks. Apparently, ammonia-based fuel cells are having a total cost of ownership which is very comparable to the standby diesel generation. Which means that, in fact, it can be an interesting alternative. The problem that I see right now is that the power that you can extract out of the ammonia-based fuel cells is still very low. Here we're talking about applications which can range between 5 and 10 kilowatt hour. Here, if we have to scale this technology up to the requirements of today's large-scale data center, which go beyond this 10 megawatt that we have been discussing before it, I would say that we still have some kilometers to run. We still have some miles to run, and we still have some work to be doing because the scaling up of this technology, at least, this is basically what I read in the technical publications and in technical papers, and also on the websites of the companies that you have mentioned, I mean, we still, I mean, the scaling up, it's tricky. It's not so straightforward. It's not so simple. That's why I believe that we need to start discussing about short-term, mid-term to long-term energy solutions.
Right.
And I would say that the ammonia fuel cells may be a player in the mid to long-term scenario.
Yeah. No, this is, I guess, this is another central point, isn't it? Are we? Wait, see, this is, Rory. I know fuel cells are your thing. I mean, I keep talking about the solid oxide because I've had some experience of those guys, and they are typically used in the United States at the moment, but also they're getting some traction overseas as primary power. So gas in, electricity out, and the grid is the redundant source. That's their operating model.
Like I've seen that these are. I think that they are maybe limited geographically in where they are cost effective from what I've seen, and
that's right.
You know, if you so the technology you're talking about, if you go to their website, they'll say get yourself ready for the wildfire and storm season. You know, with our gas-fired fuel cell system, they are good in areas of the world, i.e. California, where there's lots of data centers. And I'm about to insult people from California here.
Here we go. Denmark's gone now.
No, but the electricity grid in California would have a level of reliability that is far below what we are used to in European countries. And
There is that, and also there's the cost of gas as well.
There's the cost of gas is on the floor in America. So now I understand that where these areas that the solid oxide fuel cells are expanding to are countries with booming data center industries, which maybe the electricity are rapidly growing countries that the electricity system hasn't really maybe caught up with yet. So I understand they're growing into India, perhaps, and a few other countries that are growing quickly. So it seems that they are viable in my opinion in places that maybe don't have the same level of electrical infrastructure that we have here in Ireland.
Okay. I mean, for what it's for me, it's very much a function of the cost of gas. But let's move off this, because I'd like to return to you generally on this business of energy storage. So if we perhaps try and frame it this way. So we've got Simon's massive scheme here with 500 something megawatts of offshore wind, which directly or indirectly is going to be coupled to the campus, the Wicklow campus, right, Simon?
Yep.
And then now blend into whatever figure you want to take. Let's take a conservative one, 27% short-term projection, electricity associated with data centers in Ireland, which is phenomenal. I think it's unique. I can't think of any country which comes close to that. Then we've got the embedded generation, because at this scale, the scale we're at, as John put it very, I think, quite succinctly, you look at standby generation in the context of diesels, you are looking typically at a stranded asset, one which is only used, as you put it, John, for a very short period of time each year, as and when. So most of the time it's not being utilized. So this, to me, all is leading into a scenario where we need coordination between the grid, very close cooperation between the grid and the embedded generation and the data center for owners, such that, and this is just, I know, forgive me giving my view, but this is the way I see it, and I'd like you to challenge it, tell me I'm wrong, but I think we have to have a very tightly integrated grid, distributed generation system, albeit embedded generation systems, whether these are gas recips or whatever they are, and an intermediary, which is the energy storage, which I think right now, until hydrogen fuel cells are fully developed from a commercial point of view, we're looking at, battery energy storage, right? So the vision is one of perhaps a projection not too far ahead, where the grid and all the data centers are tightly integrated, where the data centers are not just there to support the grid, in other words, to disconnect the data center from the grid so that the data center is run from its own embedded source, but such that the embedded energy sources, in the event that renewables fall off, typically, well, in Ireland's case, obviously wind's main thing, when that falls off, then the data center embedded generation feeds the grid as well. Is that where we're heading, or is that is that too much of a stretch?
And I think you're absolutely right. And Rory touched on it earlier on, the concept of demand management, demand side management, and so on like that. Companies and there's indigenous Irish companies. I'm sure Rory's aware of Dr. Paddy Finn, who would have done a lot of work with EirGrid and so on like that. And he has a company called Electricity Exchange. And the concept there is to understand what is happening out there on the grid, actually to get a good data set so that we can analyze that data set and make those intelligent decisions, whether that's demand response type stuff or demand side management in that way. So there is, you're absolutely right. And it goes back to this thing that there is an interconnection of all of these technologies. There's no magic bullet. There is technologies that will be coagulate together to give the result that we require. And the hydrogen, I think, and the energy carrier scenario, excess wind at a very high level, curtailed, and that's a technical phrase, curtailed wind, where we over the last 24 hours we have had to curtail wind because there's been excess amount of wind over and above what we can reliably support on the grid because of the SNFP restraints. That wind could have been turned into, hydrogen. Now, are we close enough to do that? Are we close enough to be able to do that? Is there a level of efficiency that we have to consider in electrolyzers and so on like that? But the challenge is that if we don't use that energy, if we don't use that wind energy, it's gone. If we use it, at least we put it into something that makes some sense. And on top of that, if you superimpose Ireland's electricity performance in relation to carbon footprint and renewability or sustainability has been very good. But in other sectors, notably transport, we have struggled in that sense. And hydrogen vehicles and there's a big effort, and I'm sure Rory will tell you more about that. There's a big effort to move towards hydrogen vehicles in this country and use that excess in that way. So it kind of works. It works in that way. Sorry, Rory. I see you nodding, Frank.
Well, yeah. No, it sounds almost as if we rehearsed a little thing there, but we didn't. I promise. But what I'd maybe just add at that point that yes, I see, if there is, this whole idea of demand side management, hydrogen as an energy carrier, getting to really high renewable penetrations, you had asked, is hydrogen ready? Is it coming? The first hydrogen powered bus hit the roads in Dublin last week. Now, that's just one bus. And it's fueled by an industrial gas provider, just delivering hydrogen in bottles. But what I think is even more interesting than that, there'll be a project that I'm involved with starting in Antrim in the first quarter of next year called GenCom. Now the project's been going for 3 years, but its objective is to build a renewable hydrogen supply chain for County Antrim and Belfast. They have Energia has a wind farm there. They are installing a 500 kilowatt electrolyzer. That's everything. The planning permission is granted. There's a COVID holdup, but that will be producing hydrogen. It'll be produced, and I converted this to kilowatt hours just because maybe I'm speaking to a different audience today. But it's 2.5 million kilowatt hours of energy in hydrogen will be produced per year by that hydrogen production site. They have a user for 40% of the hydrogen. 40% of the hydrogen is going towards running buses in Belfast. The other 60% doesn't have a user yet. So if there's anyone who wants to try putting it into their Jan Bakker or give us a call and we'll see if we can set up, because this is the thing that makes hydrogen tricky but makes it really interesting, is that it reaches out to other sectors. In order for hydrogen to make sense, you have to link the wind sector with the bus sector and with the industrial user, which I'm in this case referring to as the data centers. So anyway, there's about 1.5 million kilowatt hours worth of hydrogen that's going to be available to the highest bidder as of next year. So that's maybe something to bear in mind.
Sorry, Antonio, I'll ask you a question. Since neither of us are Irish, but I want to get your take on this. So it seems to me the logical progression is towards this highly integrated grid, embedded, and interim energy storage. In other words, to fill the gap when the renewables fall off before the embedded systems come up. That could be a couple of minutes, depending on the type of system. It could be longer.
Mhm.
The only way I think this can happen in a coordinated way is if the government of Ireland gets behind it and makes it happen, because I really cannot see. I mean, let's be honest, Microsoft don't like Google, Google don't like Microsoft, they don't like Apple, blah, 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 blah. Getting those guys together and to coordinate in a scheme which is intrinsically important to Ireland's, as I see it anyway, Ireland's continued success in terms of hosting major data centers, it's going to need government support, isn't it?
It is, and I can basically say I cannot tell much and who are the players involved, but I can tell you that in some of the Nordic countries it's already going in like that. It's going already in this direction. So there is a direct support from the government or from the public utilities investing and supporting financially the data center operators. To further push in this direction. Yes.
All right. So okay, good. Okay. Let me just ask another question again. Anyone that wants to jump on it. Simon, you've been quite quiet, so this might be one for you. It might not be. Our dear friend, Mr. Boris Johnson, has just announced, and by the way, I didn't script this. It just occurred to me that he's going to put a whole bunch of low-level nukes, distributed nukes across the UK to provide. And as you know, nukes provide great baseload support. They're not very good for intermittent load or dynamic load. One thing that kind of troubles me about this is the baseload in Ireland. I mean, it's, you know, do you think do you think Ireland is going to need something like that? You know, in other words, enhanced baseload, traditional, whether that's, you know, CCGT, nuke, or something of that ilk, or do you think you can do this, but in concert with renewables and on-site embedded?
Since you said I wasn't talking enough, I'll give it a go first, Ed, if that's all right.
All yours, yeah.
Look, and I'm sorry, I might lean on John for some support in this. You know, the first thing is nuclear going to be palatable in Ireland? I'd say probably not.
Well, it's currently constitutionally barred, you know.
Is it?
Right.
I didn't know that.
Right.
Okay.
So
that's not going to help, is it?
I think as well, you know, if it was a viable option, it probably needed to be set in 20, 30 years ago to get us to the place where we kind of need it today. We probably can't afford to wait the other 20, 30 years it's going to take. And realistically, it is going to take that long from a standing start. Not just to get the public on board, but to achieve it technically as well. The problem still remains, though, that, you know, a base load is needed, like there is in the UK, and it's topped up. Can we achieve it with renewables? I think that's a laudable aim, and I think it is achievable. And I think, you know, we're kind of inverting the question a little bit, but I think it's back to what John mentioned earlier. It's more about the, you know, distributed on-site generation that picks up the troughs of you like of the base load, which could be wind once we develop out all the offshore facilities that we plan to. I think it's a different way to approach the problem, and hopefully a more environmentally friendly one as well.
If I could add to what Simon has said there, Ed,
Yep.
One of the challenges we have, and I'm conscious of time here, but one of the challenges we have in Ireland has been connection policy and getting connections joined, you know, done that way. The concept of distributed generation, and potentially for, you know, if you thought of it in terms of 100 megawatts of wind, you know, 100 megawatts of gas engines, and an electrolyzer that was making hydrogen, part of our challenge at the moment is the way that electricity flows around, and the way that changes when we move from distributed renewable generation to central baseload, as you're saying, Ed, baseload generation. So that's a bit of a challenge that has to be kind of taken into account as well.
Okay. All right. So
there's one thing I would say, and it's where I John and I agree on most things. I'll disagree with him on this. Is, you say there's no magic bullet, and I would suggest that probably battery energy and storage coupled with UPS systems is as close to a magic bullet as we're going to get in this. If I look at it from my perspective as a data center developer, and you look at the function of a UPS as it is at the moment, it's about power quality. It's about its use as a protection device, as a frequency modulator. And that everything flows through that before it gets to the racks, no matter what the source of the power is. So I think if you've got this, think of it like a rotating carousel of renewables, of gas, of diesel generation, if you wanted, of grid. If that's your rotating carousel of power sources, it's all gonna be going through your UPS and your battery energy and storage system. And I think the key in the future, and this is what Antonio and some of his colleagues have been working with us on, is to develop that longer and longer and longer autonomy on the batteries, so that it can shift between those different modes of generation. The other aspect to that is, there's a massive financial imperative, a massive economic imperative to do this. Rory mentioned already that the government and the grid will provide incentives, retainers essentially, for acting as a demand side unit. But it goes even further than that. If we remember the sort of economy 7 type system, it's the same idea, isn't it? If we fill our batteries up when the price of power is lower, discharge it when the price of power is higher, there are literally millions of euros to be avoided in energy costs every year. So I think we have the tools at the moment. We probably need to improve them, but this is really on the horizon for us. And as I said, for me, it kind of begins and ends with the battery storage.
we haven't talked much about UPS at all. Let's Antonio, please. Let's hear from you on UPS.
Thank you, Ed. And I fully agree with what Simon has just said right now. Very, very often I'm actually confronted with the question, what is actually the future of UPSs? I mean, how UPS is going to evolve in this overall scenario. And again, here, I would say that keyword and the keyword or the password for the future is basically integration. I mean, the UPS itself, let me just bring it to the bare technology layer. The UPS itself, or let's say the technology, is just a power converter. We basically transform energy. We shape energy. We take energy from a certain source and we transform this energy into a kind of clean power available type of power for certain critical loads. Okay, but in fact, I mean, this gives us as well the highest level of flexibility, in the sense that, I mean, with the UPS technologies, we basically can connect any type of source into it, and we can basically fulfill different type of requirements. On one side, we can use the UPS as Simon has mentioned, to supply the critical loads and to supply, servers or networking devices or connectivity devices. But on the other side, I mean, it can also be used. The same power converter can be used, to be eventually driving this battery energy storage system, which is put on the common to the point of common coupling, to be able to mitigate these swinging effects which are coming from the renewables integration.
Yeah,
we're obviously looking at all these possibilities because this is to my opinion, this is a clear trend. As Simon has mentioned, I mean, there the challenge is really the long duration, the long autonomy time, because here we're talking about 8 to 12 hours autonomy time. So obviously we have to select the right battery technology for the purpose. We need to consider that this technology, the batteries have to cycle up and down during the day. also several times during the day. So we have to look at the overall cost, associated to the cycling of the batteries. We have also to look at the right conversion architecture to make sure that there is no issue in performing both functions, so supplying the critical loads and also supporting as a battery energy storage integrated system to the network.
Right, okay, this is interesting. So, but for me, this is, I mean, as a data center designer, those of you that do know me know that I don't know anything else apart from data centers. And I can tell you now that the trajectory that every single data center that we're working on has been over the last 10, 15 years, less and less autonomy time. There was a time when we talked about 15 minutes of battery, and people like me used to get up on stage and say, and my argument was, that's ridiculous, because for the simple reason that 15 minutes of autonomy, even if you're only running at half load and said it was 30 minutes of autonomy, that is not enough time for the application management team to pick up the apps and soft land them. Typically, it's not. So we've gradually moved. We moved 10, 15. I think we started at 20 minutes, 15, 10, and the conventional wisdom now is, where are we? 5 minutes ish, maybe 7. 10 is considered excessive now. It's considered excessive.
Yeah,
I think that's I've heard there is a train of thought that goes at the moment. You only need 2 minutes autonomy on your battery, because if your generators aren't starting within 2 minutes to get you back up to full load again, they're not going to start, and you're going to lose it anyway, no matter how long you've got. Even if you've got 15 minutes autonomy, as you said, it's not enough.
That's exactly right. I mean, in fact, as a Simon, for what it's worth, if any generator system is not online within 1 minute, it's dead.
Right. Absolutely,
it's gone.
But if you
I think
a standby generator.
Yeah, no, absolutely, and I think that's the difference. Then is the change in mindset. It's not about saving the applications. It's not about bringing the generators on. I think you either do it for a little bit, your 1 minute window, or else you do it for a lot. And for the lot, you're actually doing something different.
That's right.
You're cycling through. You're providing grid services. You're making money off of it, whether it's through avoided retail charges or whether it's through the retainers that Rory talked about.
Spot on. I want to just come to John, but do you understand what I mean? I mean, this divergence, because as I listen to this panel, and we are very much talking at the moment in as I said at the beginning, in large data center with embedded energy systems. But if you look at the typical colos, the typical wholesales, we're still usually static UPS, occasionally dynamic UPS with a flywheel, maybe, static UPS, 5 minutes battery, standby diesel generators. I mean, that's really where we are for the most part, and in large sites as well. John, come on, this is your territory. Correct me.
No, look, I think you're absolutely right, and I think you have to look at the motivation. I would say that if you think about large CCGT plants, you could talk about days to get them restarted again after shutting down. The concept of standby diesels have become standby power has become very reliable in that sense, and that has facilitated a size reduction in UPSs in that way, and that makes some sense from a capital deployment perspective. But I think Simon, and is right in saying that storage systems and energy storage systems, electricity storage systems, batteries, in that sense, I think are going to play a bigger and bigger part in this. And the ability, if you take in the gas engine world, we have a particular configuration of a gas engine to do that 1 minute startup and loading. And we have a different configuration of the gas engine to do, energy, because that different configuration in an energy context is to make sure that the engine converts the fuel in the most efficient way. In the pure, the 1 minute startup type thing, what we're trying to do there is make the engine run, make the engine get up and accept load in that very short period of time, and that's not necessarily compatible with with the energy function. So by increasing the size of the storage and then bringing say the engines on, you have that ability to ensure that stability in that way. You know, I think going back to in the UK, Ed, in 2018, was it? You had the event one Friday night where, you know, they had a confluence of things happened, and there was, you know, the south of England, and this is an overgeneralization, but the south of England went black and trains stopped, and they weren't able to get restarted. And, you know, that what in grid terms we describe as a global frequency event, you know, they will become more challenging, and the ability of a system to be compartmentalized, or even for that contagion not to spread from cell to cell or network to network is very important, you know. But again, it's the question comes is configuring the system to do what you need it to do, and in some cases now that requirement is changing, and changing quite dramatically. In a 65% or a 70% SNSP world, the functionality of embedded generation on a site is very different than it was when we had, you know, we were measuring any outages in terms of minutes.
I think.
Sorry,
I
Simon,
think.
go ahead.
Sorry, no. I think, you know, John's made a good point there. That, you know, there are the advocates of the shorter and shorter autonomies on the batteries, but at the same time that we're seeing that, we're also seeing larger and larger periods of out of frequency on the power. So not a power failure, not a dropout in the power, but an out of frequency event, and those can and do last minutes. So yeah, we've always got to remember that the UPS isn't just as to ride through until the generators come on. It's about the power quality as well.
That's something you're seeing in Ireland, the out of frequency issue, is it? Because it's not something I was aware of.
Again, I would say to you that there's a website you can look at that. Yes, we are seeing excursions, but I would say to you that given the circumstance in Ireland that exists, and I know I'm probably sounding overly nerdy, and most people that know me know I'm not overly nerdy, but you know, if you look at where we are, you look at our, you know, and Rory mentioned a lack of interconnectivity. You know, we're an island off the west coast of Europe. You know, we have done very well, and yes, we are seeing some frequency issues, but again, I would go back and say that Air Grid have done an excellent job on that. And the other side of that is that the way to stabilize that is for potentially embedded generators to be turned on, not for energy purposes, but for frequency stabilization purposes, which is, you know, bread and butter to a guy like me, but doesn't mean very much to non-electricity or energy types in that sense.
Okay.
Antonio is nodding there, so I know that he understands what I'm considering there in that sense.
Antonio, you want to add to that?
No, absolutely. I fully agree with what gentlemen have already contributed. I think definitely there is an issue with the frequency stabilization. I also understand, and I also know that in Ireland, I mean, the problem itself can be definitely considered of a minor scale compared to some other countries. But I definitely agree as well with the fact that the UPSs, by utilizing the energy stored in the batteries, can definitely contribute in supplying the critical loads, and at the same time also regulate the frequency swings which are happening on the grid, on the utility. Absolutely.
Okay. Good. Well, where are we now? We've only got doesn't time fly, doesn't it? Really?
When you're enjoying yourself, yes, it does.
Yeah. Look, there's only 15 minutes left, so there are a few questions in the. Can you guys see the questions in your thing there? Anyone want to pick them up? Just a note on frequency, just to annoy you all. So switch mode power supplies don't actually care about frequency very much, but the mechanical system. So you know, the voltage is more important, but that doesn't mean that power systems won't change in future. So I still think, you know, frequency is important, but it's certainly not as, you know, if your frequency drops to 45 hertz, it's not going to make any difference to your server.
The challenge there, Ed, though, is the way in which you protect the grid and frequency gives you the best opportunity to isolate faults in that sense. So, you know, I think you're right in the context of the data center that the frequency is not as important as the stability of the voltage, but as an indicator of what is taking place on the grid, those micro changes in frequency give you very, very accurate feedback as to events and then the resetting of those events in that way. So, okay. And I'm not an expert in grid protection, but I think that it's incumbent to say that in that way.
You know a lot more than I do, and that's clear. Okay, so maybe we look at some of these questions. So where do we want to start?
Start at the beginning, maybe. It's
okay. So I think there's a question here from Brian Woods. Is it not true that there is power shortage in Ireland? Yeah, I think we've covered that. There is, however, a power flow restriction in transmission to a segment of Dublin. This would be overcome by generators located. Anyone want to comment on that one?
Well, I think that's a fairly well-known thing. You know, that there is lots of generation capacity in Ireland. Absolutely, lots of generation capacity, renewable and other capacity. That there is a little bit of a challenge coming in the future with retirement of what we call base load stations and so on like that. But there is significant constraints in the concentration of transmission capability around Dublin, and then the ability to influence that and to upgrade it to different things, you know. So
what does that mean for the industry, though, John? What does that mean for the data center industry in the immediate location of Dublin?
Well, you know, maybe that's Simon. I think Simon should answer.
Yeah, sorry, sorry, John, cut across. We were an hour and 16 minutes into a panel discussion on power in data centers in Dublin, and we haven't mentioned flexible demand yet. So the answer to your question, Ed, is that EirGrid and then ESBN as well, the TSO and the DSO have instigated a policy of flexible demand. So in every new connection offer being issued at the moment, there's a term that says that EirGrid and or ESBN can ramp down your MIC upon suitable notice, obviously, to the data center customer. So, you know, that's causing a little bit of anxiety in the industry at the moment. As you can imagine, data centers don't cope too well when you have the power turned off. But so that's one tool that EirGrid are using, and that applies only to the constrained area. So that's the greater Dublin area, and again, that's to do with the transmission issues that exist. One thing I will say, though, is that EirGrid have, as part of their flexible demand policy, have stated that if you can provide on-site dispatchable generation. So to give you an example, at our Dub 10 and our Dub 40 facility, we have gas recip engine power plant essentially. So that's available for dispatch to the grid, and in as part of the quid pro quo for that, EirGrid will not ramp down our MIC, so we can avoid flexible demand by having the on-site dispatchable generation. So without saying it in that particular way, you know, EirGrid is essentially forcing data center operators down the road of having on-site generation.
Okay. Thanks. Yeah, you're right. That was something that we didn't cover adequately earlier. John, this is something that we discussed yesterday, isn't it? Do you want to add to that?
Look, it absolutely is, and I guess, you know, at the end of the day, I'm very conscious that, you know, it's you know, these discussions develop kind of organically in that way, but it is one of those kind of methodologies that EirGrid are using to encourage this a symbiotic relationship, if you like, between the data centers and the grid in that way. And if you know, like, the logical thing here is it does make sense. You know, it's making lots of sense to locate data centers here. And you know, when I spoke earlier, you know, we forget about the big data pipes that happen to terminate here in Ireland. You know, that's one of the things that is one of the advantages. You know, there's there's a collection of very large data pipes, the methodology of moving the data around that come into Europe through Ireland, and therefore that becomes a very good reason to locate your data center here. But the advent of firm and non-firm MIC is driving particular things, and is supporting those discussions the discussions we've had this afternoon in that way as well.
But I think it does come back to this point, and in terms of integration that we talked about, is that this is where the government has to go. So I can understand the utility saying what they're saying, and that's something that they can control without having to go for further legislation. But for this to be meaningful, and Rory, I'm mindful of the fact that you haven't spoken for a while, and I know you think hydrogen is a minority sport, but please do chip in. This is only really going to work if the government steps in and says, you AWS, you Microsoft, irrespective of whether it's your own site or whether you're co-located, there has to be collaboration across these embedded generation systems. Absolutely. In my opinion, I mean, just giving you my view, there has to be very tight integration, because what Ireland is doing is something, by the way, which Singapore unfortunately is completely unable to do. In my opinion, is fundamentally why there's a moratorium on data center approval for the most part in Singapore right now, because they cannot do what Ireland is doing, which is to offset or mitigate the carbon footprint that would otherwise be associated with data centers by virtue of renewables and a better generation. So, but it all comes back to tighter integration, doesn't it? That's the government has got to step in for this to work. Otherwise, we're going to have a whole island of embedded generation systems all doing their own thing, only partly controlled. Do you see what I mean? Does that make sense?
Yeah, I think you're right, Ed. But I think that EirGrid and other people and the policy direction, and Eamon Ryan, after a hiatus away from the Department of Climate Change, has returned, and hopefully we will see more investment in renewables, which will benefit us all in the long term. But I think that what we're trying, or what the policy and EirGrid and ESBN and everybody is trying to do here, is create a market that signals for these changes to occur. Rather than imposing those, creating that market, and the best signal is the one that Simon spoke about there, in the sense of that, yes, you can have a connection, but the conditions of that connection are going to be slightly different in that way, and that is necessary, and I think, in fairness to EirGrid, they have embarked on an information campaign recently to try and make people understand that a little bit more. But it is a complex topic, and it's not maybe as easy to make to get that message across in that way. I got across you there,
John. There's a question here from a chap called Dave Goulding. And it says, is there a natural fear of demand side management within the DC community? Now, obviously, I can't speak for you, Simon. Echelon would dream of it, but I can, I think, talk for a vast number of people that we work with. You bet there is. You bet there is. For the most part, the prevailing view amongst technical management, senior management, is get off my land. It's my data center. It's my data center. I don't want anything to do with demand side management. I don't really want to even. I certainly don't want to feed into the grid. If I've got to parallel with it, I will if you force me. So, do you see what I'm saying? That, in my opinion, and based on every single group that we work with, they don't want this. Although it is the natural way to proceed. And I'm not just saying it for the hell of it, because we're talking data center islands, but this is where Ireland has to trailblaze. But surely you can't do it without government. I hear what you say, EirGrid to this, EirGrid to that, but you've got to go a step further.
I think the other side of that is that there's a great difference between the data center industry and the energy industry. And for somebody like me that has spent more years than I care to remember putting molecules in pipes or electrons in wires, for us that's not a big deal. And this is where I think that kind of piece comes, that it's very scary to sit in somebody's office and talk about, not being 5 nines, not having 5 nines availability. But if for us, the concepts we're speaking about here, and I mean the energy community as distinct to the data center community. For the energy community, we're doing on-site generation for literally 100 years or 120 years, and integrating that is not that complex. However, it does challenge maybe the design paradigm. And Simon, you and I have had discussions about this. It does challenge the design paradigm of should we call it the traditional data center?
Okay, yeah. Listen, I mean, just to share with you, we've been involved with 3 litigation cases in the last couple of years. One's in the tens of millions of pounds, 2 are in the hundreds of millions of pounds. Okay, so we talk about 5 nines and SLAs. That for me, that's meaningless. What's important is when there is an incident which governments, where is either existing legislation or the incident is so severe that it warrants future legislation, all bets are off. So this is the challenge with the data center industry. It is famously risk averse. I'm fascinated by what's going on in Ireland. I think there's a real opportunity to do something different, and I think and do it first. And I think if Ireland does it first, I think others will follow. But by God, there's going to be opposition to it. Definitely is, because of this. What I mean, Simon, you're the CTO for Echelon. You must know about these litigations. I'm not saying you've been sued, of course, but it's that serious, isn't it?
No, it is for sure. And before I had this job, I was working for a professional services firm, and I remember being involved in plenty of meetings where the Riot Act was read, and insurers were asked to be notified and things like that. It's a real and present danger, and the biggest thing is the losses that can occur. And there's been some high profile ones in Singapore and in London in recent years, which make the press. I know a lot of them don't. They're in the tens of millions. So it is important to get right. One thing I will say though is that there's a general trend in terms of how we design for these things, how we assess the risk. So if you were to go back 30 years ago and you were building a data center for a bank, that's completely, it's almost unrecognizable now compared to walking into a cloud service provider's facility, with its, block redundant 12-to-1 ratios, availability zones. It's very different. So I think we've got a different appreciation of risk. We've got a different way of dealing with it, and it comes back to there's an economic imperative in there. And I can't help but think that what we're seeing at the moment in terms of the grid services, in terms of the power quality, in terms of really everything that we've discussed today, is probably just the next step in that. It's probably an evolution of that. There has to be an appreciation that things aren't always going to be the same as they were before. We have a need to change them, and now is as good a time as any, given the challenges that we face.
Got it. And
can I just offer a perspective from outside the sector,
from the hydrogen industry?
Well, no, from I guess from people who aren't sort of involved in the trenches in data centers, and that I think just there's definitely a direction that certain media stories are going in at the minute when they talk about energy in the data center. And I said at the beginning of my there is some truth in them. I think the message is maybe getting a bit kind of contorted in them. But I think that there's an opportunity, when we're looking at demand side management, we're looking at grid support. I think there's an opportunity for the data center industry to say, this is one of the things we can do here. We can enable this really high renewable penetration. And I wonder, is there something on the kind of the softer sell for data centers, that it's maybe something a little bit tangible that I attend a lot of talks that Gary Conley gives, and he really tries to emphasize what the data center industry does for Ireland. I think this could be another potential that you could talk about, that you are there enabling with some kind of demand side management, with some embedded generation, enabling higher amounts of renewables to be brought on.
Listen, fundamentally, I think that's absolutely front and center. With aside from all the negatives that I've mentioned, and that's just as a consulting engineer that's done a lot of work with lawyers and stuff, and designed a lot of stuff over the years. That's what we've seen. So I think, but you're right, that is front and center. The overriding thing is the sustainability issue, something, Antonio, I know is very dear to you. I've got to say, I'm sorry, we've run out of time. We've hit our hour and a half. Antonio, Rory, John, Simon, thank you very much. You've been tremendous. I apologize if I've not covered anything that you would like me to have covered, but as we are, we've run out of time. So thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks, Ed.
Very much.
Can I?
It was a great moderation, Ed. Thank you.
On behalf, from Data Centers Ireland, Ed, that was a tremendous panel discussion. All of you, I thank you. There's a heck of a lot of information gone through there. Apart from, I'd like to thank Rory especially, not from the sector. I'd like to thank your son who appeared at the glass door for holding off.
Did he?
Coming to see his dad.
With these head on here.
Very impressive.
And by the way, John, I assume that with that great sales lead that came out of Belfast and the hydrogen project, the stipend for Rory is sorted out for the next few years.
We'll talk, Rory. We'll talk.
Simon, good luck with. I know that you're not yet a year with Echelon. You've got some huge projects going on. Good luck with those, and I think you could be leading maybe some of these ways that have been talked about today. Antonio, UPS is. I absolutely agree. You've got short-term, medium-term, and long-term goals, and perhaps Rory comes in the long-term goals. And Ed, one last time, thank you. That was a really tremendous discussion. When you said, "Oh no, I don't think we'll feel an hour and a half," I knew you were wrong.
Okay. Yeah. All right. Well, listen. Thanks to everyone again. Thank you.
Thank you very much. And Data Centers Ireland, this will be available on demand probably by Monday because we're only a small team. Thank you very much. Goodbye.
Thanks, everyone.
Thank you.
Cheers.
Thank you, Ed.
Bye-bye.
Thank you very much.
Bye-bye.